as you can see, they're fairly heavily corroded. I'm not sure that they would operate. Inside the wet well still, this is just a look at what some of the platforms look like. The lighting doesn't work. That's, I guess, not a real big issue. You bring your own light, but like I say, it is 30 years old. Some things have worn out and they aren't being maintained as well. Still in the wet well now, you can see what some of the sewage is like here. We've seen much bigger mats of rags and stuff. This seems to be, it's working okay as far as conveying everything that comes in. You can see here the corrosion. Okay, I want to talk a bit about level controls and backup instrumentation. At this point right now, there's only one device measuring the level in the station and controlling the pumps, and that is this ultrasonic level transducer. So it sends like a depth finder in your boat. It sends a pulse down, measures the height of the water based on a sound signal. And if that were to fail, there's nothing else really telling the pumps to start or stop. So right now, one small instrument worth maybe a couple $1,000 is keeping the whole system running. The rest of the floats, which could work as a backup, are tangled on the side here. Likely would not trigger any of the this kind of thing is I guess, one of our real strong recommendations. Update the control systems, get some more information back to the operators so that they can be on top of things if there was ever a spill or a piece of equipment malfunction. The ventilation ductwork is also corroded. The fan wasn't working while we were there, but there is some natural ventilation through that system, which is really good. It's important because there are gases that come through. Hydrogen sulfide gas can attack the concrete in the ductwork. This is a look at the dry pits. My boss Dave was there in the one picture. I don't know if any of you know him. He was involved with some of the swear board meetings earlier, but couldn't be here today. He had a bypass surgery a couple weeks ago, so he's feeling better anyway, but obviously not here to be with us. The pumps themselves, there's 3 pumps, and any one of the pumps right now is large enough to handle the current flows. So that means you have redundancy in the pumps in case one of them were to fail, you have a backup. And that's really, really important. The pumps are not easy to replace at a moment's notice. It's a 40 horsepower pump. You have to go and find it somewhere, and there's a lot of different performance criteria you need to meet with a pump, so it's not just an off-the-shelf item. This pump here, you can see there's corrosion, rust around the fitting between the pump and the motor itself. There's seals in there, and they haven't been taken apart and maintained. It's common for them to leak a bit by the time they're this old. We would normally expect a pump to last maybe 25 years. These have lasted 32. So they're certainly at or beyond their expected life. This here is some of the other equipment in that dry pit. The flow meter itself, I believe, is the original to this station. The technology is the same now, but you can get a lot more, I guess, toys on the flow meter and a little more accuracy too. The other device on the right here is a check valve. The check valve has kind of like a suspension system. It's got a damper in there to keep it from slamming and opening too quickly. All of those small working parts have rusted. They're not performing the way they should anymore. But the good news is, in this system, with the 14-inch pipe, you've got all this momentum of the water moving through the pipe, but you have a surge tank which helps protect that system from the transient pressures. Just to illustrate for you, there's 3 kilometers of pipe that's 14 inches around. That's 300 tons of water. So when you turn the pump on, it takes quite a while for the water to start moving, like on the order of 20 or 30 seconds for it to all finally start moving at the speed the pump is pushing it. And then if you were to turn the switch off and make that pump stop running, you have all this momentum of the water and it's still going. And it's that energy in the water that can cause a lot of damage to the force main. But here, this tank has enough volume in it, the surge tank, that it cushions the flow, slows it down gently, prevents any of these transient pressures from causing damage to the force main. And I guess I'm privileged being able to work with computers and so on. We were able to model some of these transient pressures and learn, I guess basically prove to ourselves that the tank is the right size for the current flows. But there's a bunch of corrosion on some of the fixtures that are part of the tank, and we really strongly recommend taking a closer look at this tank to make sure that it's still in good shape. We measured the thickness of the steel using ultrasound, which is the same equipment you use in the hospital to check the baby's heart rate and stuff. We used ultrasound to measure the wall thickness of the steel, and we found that it was consistent everywhere, so there likely isn't a lot of corrosion inside the tank, but we can't prove that without taking it apart a bit. So that's one of the first steps we're recommending, is do a little more investigation on this tank, make sure that it's still protecting your force main, change out these bits of piping that are so strongly rusted that this one air valve, in fact, was leaking air while we were there, and I'm curious as to whether it's still holding right now. There's more views of the surge tank and the air compressor that feeds it. The motor control center, it looks fairly nice here. The problem with the motor control center is it's also 30 years old and it's no longer supported by Westinghouse. So if something were to break with it, this switches on and off with every pump cycle. So it's like a much larger motor control, like a light switch only for a 40 horsepower motor. And it's got the transfer switch in case the power were to fail. It's really much more common now to have more of an interactive display for the operators, a programmable logic controller of some kind, and feedback going back to a central location or to their phone or some way so that they can keep in touch with what's happening here. And while some of that could be adapted to this equipment, it's no longer supported. It needs, you'd likely have to go somewhere, an antique shop, to replace something if it broke. This is the generator itself, an old diesel engine. Looks to me to be in remarkably good shape still. Being a farm boy, I know we've had lots of tractors in the yard that are 50 years old, stuff from my grandfather that still runs, right? So there's obviously a question there. I know lots of things competing for your time and energy as council members, and spend your money like it's your own. Would you buy a new diesel engine if it's 30 years old and still working? We're recommending you at least replace the fuel system components that are no longer meeting the TSSA standards. But as far as the engine goes, that's I guess it's a risk management question whether you're comfortable with something. It really would be a recommendation to replace it sooner than later. If we go out onto the force main now, there's two chambers with air valves. They're submerged most of the time just with the rainwater that gets in there, so they look slimy and a bit corroded. Overall, the piping isn't in that bad a shape, but I'm certain the air valves themselves have become corroded and plugged. That's a very common maintenance item that needs more attention. And what happens if an air bubble gets inside your pipe is it restricts the amount of flow that can get through there, and you see a decline in performance of the station.